Okay, thank you, Abuna. So tonight what I want to talk about is about vaping and e-cigarettes and some of the dangers of vaping. Maybe some of you guys are familiar with what vaping is and what e-cigarettes are, and maybe some of this is a bit of a review for you. But I'll talk about it in detail about what e-cigarettes are and what are the potential harms. But before we get into what e-cigarettes are, what I want to talk first about is just regular cigarettes. The cigarettes that we smoke, the regular, hopefully not, we don't smoke, but people smoke. Now, when I talk about cigarettes, most people in the room will shake their heads and say, yes, I know cigarettes are bad. I know that we're not supposed to do it. But that wasn't always the case. And actually, if you look back in history, people didn't know that cigarettes were bad for them. Cigarettes actually have been around for a long time. It comes from tobacco. Tobacco has been around for thousands of years, mostly here in the Americas. And it wasn't actually until Christopher Columbus came in the 15th century and he discovered, and the Native Americans, they offered him this tobacco leaf. He didn't know what it was. But when he took it, he brought it back to Europe, and it just spread like wildfire. Everyone, what is this tobacco thing? It's amazing, and the effect that it has on you. People really, really liked it. And within 50 years, everybody in Europe was already growing tobacco, and it spread to the rest of sort of the world. And so for the next couple of hundred of years, people used to smoke tobacco in like pipes, or they would, there's different ways that they would smoke it. And it wasn't really until maybe in the 1800s that people developed the cigarette, the one that's disposable, that you would roll it up and then they could smoke it and then they would throw it out. And things went on like that for a while. People were smoking cigarettes in the 1800s and in the 1900s. And it wasn't until maybe the 1900s when people started to notice, the doctors started to notice that maybe it's actually not good for you. And they started to see a higher rate of lung diseases that we didn't see before. Things like lung cancer, things like COPD, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Lung cancer, anybody know somebody that's died from lung cancer before? I'm sure you guys have seen it before. But lung cancer used to be very rare. Actually, it wasn't common at all. In fact, it was so rare that there used to be case reports about it, that they would write about it just, like, wow, we witnessed a case of lung cancer. It was that rare, and that's how they used to see it. But now, all of a sudden, more and more people were developing lung cancer, and doctors started to notice the connection. When they did, newspapers refused to publish any of the findings that said, oh, smoking can cause lung cancer. And the reason why the newspapers didn't want to do that is because many of the ads and the advertisements were paid for by these big companies. Here's just a couple of examples of this this is in like the 1940s, 1950s. But you can see, the one on the right, I thought more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. They're trying to show everyone, these are the ones that you want to smoke if you want to be, cool. So, and smoking, yeah, exactly. That's because that was common, but they didn't. So one was they didn't know, but when they started to know or find out, they didn't want others to know, and so the advertisements that they showed out there was not only doctors smoke, but like they showed the pretty ladies, and they showed like this is, if you want to get to be very cool, then this is what you need to do. And in fact, if you look, probably the height of when people smoked would have been, at least here in America, would have been in the 1950s, 1960s. If you ever had a chance to talk to somebody that was that fought in World War II, like some of the very, very old, not that much anymore, but maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, used to find, they would tell you that they used to pass out cigarettes with their rations. So when they go to fight, they get a blanket, they get a pillow, they get a weapon, and they get cigarettes. Because everybody got cigarettes. Because they didn't know any better. They said cigarettes, this was just something to boost morale, make people feel better. And many of the people that later became addicted to cigarettes, they blamed their first cigarettes on that time whenever they were serving in the army. And like I said, also, they used to advertise very heavily. But the doctors and public health officials really saw the adverse effects, and they pushed through so that people would understand. So, this is just a graph. You don't have to see the details, but you can see the line clearly is going up because people are using cigarettes more and more, and it peaks somewhere in the 1950s, 1960s, and then it starts to come down. And the thing that brought it down, one of the first things, was the U.S. Surgeon General report, basically the government coming out and saying, you know what, we actually can say confidently that cigarettes are bad, and that cigarettes are causing people to die from cancer and other things. And that's when you start to see it come down and sort of get better. But you'll see why this is important in a minute. And now, while things are better than they once were, there's still, a lot of bad things that we're suffering as effects of those cigarettes. So again, the one on the left is showing again how cigarettes and the use of cigarettes is better than what it used to be. So it's clearly gotten better, but there's still a lot of improvement that we need to make. But there's a lot of bad things that cigarettes do aside from just the effect on the lungs. We know in the lungs it can affect and cause lung cancer, and that's what the numbers at the bottom show you. How many new people every year are diagnosed with lung cancer, and that if you smoke, if you're a woman and you smoke, you're 17 times more likely to develop lung cancer. If you're a man and you smoke, you're 15 times more likely to get lung cancer. And a lot of people die from it too. Okay, 60 to 70,000 people die from it every year. So lung cancer is a big deal. And it's not the only thing that tobacco and cigarettes cause. There's cardiovascular disease, so people getting heart attacks. There's people suffering from depression, people getting diabetes, and there's been shown to be a link between diabetes and smoking cigarettes. So, like I said, things are better than they once were, but there's still this battle of trying to get people to quit smoking. So the question is, why is it so hard to get people to quit smoking? And the reason actually has to do with the way cigarettes are, the sort of the chemical composition of cigarettes. So if you look at cigarettes, I know we're going to talk about e-cigarettes, but you have to understand cigarettes first before we can get to e-cigarettes. This is really important. But with cigarettes, what happens is the main active ingredient in cigarette smoke is something called nicotine. Nicotine. So what happens is when you burn the tobacco leaf, the active ingredient that becomes like smoke. You inhale it. It goes into the lungs, and then from there, the blood will pump that nicotine into different parts of the body, but specifically the nerves in your body, all over your body. And it binds, and this picture is trying to show you here that there's like a receptor that it binds to. That's not that important, but the point is, when it binds to the receptor, it causes this thing over here in the brain, which is called dopamine release. Dopamine is a chemical that's linked to pleasure, okay? It's the pleasure chemical in the body. So a lot of things can cause dopamine to be released in the body. Anything that causes pleasure can release dopamine. So you hear a nice song and music, you like music, that can induce pleasure. You eat something nice or eat some good food, that again can induce pleasure. And that pleasure, and there's other things obviously as well. I mean, the things that we commonly think of, for instance, like relationships with husband and wives, that also brings pleasure, and that causes dopamine release. Substance use can also cause this same type of pleasure. The challenge with this is when you inhale that nicotine, the time from when you inhale it to the time that you get the release of the dopamine is seconds. Seconds, okay? And that's why if you ever see people who smoke cigarettes, they get sort of jittery when they get that first puff of the cigarettes, calms down, and it feels much better. And because of how fast it is, it actually has the highest addiction potential amongst all the different drugs, even more so than things like cocaine or heroin or other drugs that we think of, illegal drugs. If you look and you talk to people that have used them, and they've sort of published this, it is harder to quit cigarettes than it is to quit cocaine or heroin or even alcohol. Cigarettes is the top thing. And it's because of this the nicotine and how fast it gets absorbed. Yeah.
Everybody on the same page ولا عايزين نترجم أي حاجة؟ Heba can give just a very quick لأن we want to finish the whole thing.
صورة سجاير. غير كده النيكوتين ابتدى يتشهر ويزيد استخدامه جدا جدا لحد ما بقى كله بيستخدمه ستات ورجالة. وابتدى كان زمان المشاكل بتاعة الرئة، حاجة زي سرطان الرئة بالتخصيص، كان حاجة نادرة جدا في الطب، ما بيكتشفوهاش غير كل فين وفين. ففي المجالات الطبية لما تيجي حالة بنبلغها على انها حاله في العالم، يعني اسمها كيس ريبورت، يعني نقول لك يا ده في دكتور في الحته الفلانيه جات له حاله كانسر ويكتب عليها من كتر ما كانت حاجه نادره. ايهاب كان حاطط سلايد من شويه، حوالي 116,000 واحد تقريبا سنويا دلوقتي بيجي لهم نيو بريست كانسر، 116,000 تقريبا، و119 غيرهم رجاله، يعني دول الستات وغير رجاله. احنا بنتكلم على اكتر من 4 مليون واحد سنويا، غير الناس اللي بتموت كل سنه. ما بين الاثنين تقريبا 120,000 واحد بيموتوا دلوقتي من سرطان الرئه. الاعلانات مع ان ابتدى يتعرف المشاكل اللي مرتبطه بالسجاير من بدري، الجرايد والمجلات رفضت انها تنشر التحذيرات للناس، بالعكس كانوا بيحطوا اعلانات، لان الاعلانات كلها كانت بتيجي ومصدر دخل معظم الجرايد كان من شركات السجاير، وكانوا بيدعموا الحاجات دي في الافلام وفي كده، the money business. فتقريبا 1964 السيرجن جنرال اللي هو اكبر دكتور يعتبر منصب طب في الدولة رقابي، أصدر إن السجاير مضرة فعلا. ولو خدتوا بالكم من الكيرف من 64 ل 2010، يعني 64 كان أكتر عدد ناس بتدخن في أمريكا. It took that many years، حوالي 40 سنة علشان بس ننزل الكيرف شوية. وإيهاب شرح إن هو ده لأن مادة النيكوتين اللي موجودة بتاخد ثواني من ساعة ما السيجارة تتولع، بتقلب بخار. النيكوتين في مادة البخار بيروح عن طريق الرئة، يلزق في كرات الدم الحمراء، يمشي في الدم، وبيروح لكل الأعصاب اللي في الجسم. في كل عصب في الجسم في زي ريسبتور أو مكان النيكوتين بيركب فيه بشكل ممتاز جدا، وده بيخلي مادة تانية كيميائية اسمها الدوبامين تفرز. والدوبامين دي مادة انبساط أو سعادة اللي في جسمنا. حاجات زي الموسيقى، السكس، الدراجز، العلاقات الإنسانية، كل الحاجات المبهجة دي بتعمل لنا في جسمنا دوبامين ريليس. نيكوتين بيعمل الحكاية دي، فرق النيكوتين بيعملها في ثواني. فبرضو معلومة تانية انه في كل الحاجات اللي ممكن الواحد يدمنها، من كل المخدرات اللي ممكن تفكروا فيها، نيكوتين أصعب حاجة أثبتت الدراسات الطويلة المدى إن الواحد يوقفها. قد كده it's very very addictive، لأن السرعة بتاعة الإيفكت بتاعته الواحد بيحس بيها على طول، فبتبقى أصعب بكتير قوي إن هو يتركها.
My Arabic is not good enough for that. معلش. Now the thing is, nicotine is not the only thing that's released when you smoke. When you smoke the cigarettes, they've measured over 7,000 different chemicals that are released, and you inhale that. Many of them are what they call carcinogenic, meaning it can cause cancer. and it can also do a lot of other bad things to the body. Okay, so one of the questions that people came up with was, well, what if we could get the same nicotine, but without the 7,000 other chemicals, and just only be high concentration of nicotine, so you get the pleasure and you get that good feeling, but you don't get these other bad things. And that's how they came up with the e-cigarette. So what is e-cigarette? So the e-cigarette, basically, this is a diagram where what they do is, how's the best way to do this? They take a solution that has the nicotine. It's concentrated with nicotine. And then boil that solution. When you heat it up, it creates the smoke, okay, or vapor. That's why they call it that's why it's vaping. But that vapor, then you can inhale it, and then it takes in. So every time that you inhale, it will heat up the battery here, so that way it can cause the vapor, and that's how you get it in. The best way to think about it, if you were, for instance, if you're cooking, okay, and you're boiling water. Yeah. Right, so if you boil water, if you put, something that smells good, if you put some spices or something in there, it's going to smell good because you're inhaling that. So it's the same thing. What it's doing is you're taking the nicotine and putting it in, and then it boils, and that's how you get that vapor in. Okay, that's the basics of it. I don't know if you want to. Is that clear?
I think you're good with that, right?
Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of how it works. Now you'll see different things about the cigarettes. There's different versions of it over the years, and we'll take a look at some pictures of how these things look. But sometimes e-cigarettes is technically a little bit different than a vape, but they do the same thing, which is that you're taking the nicotine, you're boiling it, and vaporizing it, so that way you can inhale the nicotine. And there's, like I said, there's different ways that you can do it. Now, why do the kids like it? Well, because it looks cool. Okay. One of the names, for instance, one of the ways that this look is Juul, Juul. Okay. This is the most popular brand of the e-cigarettes. Okay. It's so popular that people actually sometimes will call it juuling. They may not even call it vaping or smoking e-cigarettes. They just say juuling. Okay. Because that's the most popular brand for it. And the way that it looks, if you look at this, it just looks like a USB thumb drive, the ones that you put into your computer. So that's what it looks like. It's very slick, it's very compact, it's very discreet. And then when you finish a cartridge, you can put in a new one. You just plug it in like you plug in for a computer, okay? And this is sort of one example of how it looks, but there are other ones that look more like everyday items. Every one of these things is a vaping device, okay? That just looks like lipstick, but no, it's for vaping. That one is a pen, but nope, it's for vaping. And this last one is like a key fob, like you put on your keychain, but it's for vaping, okay? And this is really important because the whole goal of this is so it can be discreet, so that nobody can see what it is that you're doing. And if you were an adult, you may want to do that because you don't want other people to see. But if you're a kid, you can do this so that you can hide it from your parents or from your teachers and things like that. So it's very easy to disguise it and things like,
USB drive, الواد بيذاكر it's so easy to hide. It's so easy.
Very easy.
That's why we have a huge problem. Oh, by the way, الجولي دي اللي بيقولك دي كانت لسه بيadvertise it on TV. يعني احنا
Yeah.
we go back للي كانوا بيعملوه مع السيجارة.
Yeah.
Advertising it. Well, now they know it's dangerous, but nobody says it's dangerous.
Yeah.
Same reason, it's money. It's the market.
Yep. Yeah. So this is just to give you sort of a background about the e-cigarettes and sort of how they came about. So the question is, why is it not safe, right? Because we said, okay, well, cigarettes, 7,000 chemicals, very dangerous. So the e-cigarette sounds like maybe it should be safe, right? Since it doesn't have all those compounds and chemicals. But the fact of the matter is it's not, and there's a few reasons. One is that e-cigarettes have nicotine. Okay, e-cigarettes have nicotine. Many kids actually don't realize that. And if you actually ask a kid, they may say, no, this doesn't have any nicotine. In fact, here, I'll show you. It's too small. Sorry. The one on the left, it says, what do teens say is in their e-cigarettes. So they actually asked teenagers, and they said, what do you think is in it? Okay? And it's very small. 2/3 of people, 66% of kids, said it's just vapor. They don't even know that there is nicotine in it, and they wonder why it's so addictive, okay? But there's nicotine in it. There is a very small percentage of vaping devices that don't have nicotine, but that's maybe like 1%. Like most of it, 99% are going to have nicotine in there. And like I said, this sort of helps to demonstrate. Now, the nicotine, how much nicotine is in there? In one pod, like one cartridge of the Juul, the one that we saw earlier, like this, this one here. You guys see the mouse? I don't know. That one has the equivalent of an entire pack of cigarettes. Okay, and I think this graph shows it here. So one Juul pod is equal to 20 cigarettes. That's one pack. It's 20 cigarettes. Okay, and so you're actually getting a lot of nicotine when you smoke these e-cigarettes. Okay, and what's worse is that when you can order refill bottles, and in the refill bottles they give you, I think you can get a refill bottle that has 1 gram. Okay, which is the equivalent of, let's see, it's probably maybe 10 or 20 packs of cigarettes in one refill. And obviously you don't put the whole thing in because you can die, and some people have because they didn't know, but you can increase the concentration. You can give more than you want. If you want to get maybe a little bit more nicotine, you can do that, and it's easy to do with this way. So that's the first thing. There's nicotine in it. So don't let anybody tell you that there's no nicotine. There's definitely nicotine in the e-cigarettes. Okay? The second thing is the nicotine is placed into some fluid, some liquid, a solution. Okay? And that solution, you burn it. All right? You boil it so that way that's how you get the nicotine out. The problem is that, and this is sort of just showing you that, nicotine is one component. But these two other things, glycerin, propylene glycol, they're just some chemicals that you put the medicine in. The problem is when you burn it, you're going to get more of those same chemicals that we got when we burned the cigarettes. We said there's 7,000 chemicals. This also has a lot of chemicals, maybe not 7,000, but a lot of chemicals that you burn and that you inhale, and those things can also cause cancer, and they've shown that as well. Okay? And the other thing is that it's not regulated. The government is trying to figure out ways to make sure, but it's not regulated the same way like cigarettes are. I mean, cigarettes are bad enough, but there's nobody that can tell you have to make it like this, or it has to be safe, or it has to be this. So anybody can do anything that they want, so there's no regulation of the solution or the fluid. The other thing is that you can add things to it. So we said already that you're putting nicotine. That's bad. But what people came up with the smart idea of, well, what if we added something like marijuana to it, okay? And this is very common. People will add THC, which is the active component in marijuana, the active ingredient, okay? So now you're smoking both tobacco and marijuana together, okay? Very potent combination, very, very addictive. And of course, marijuana, we'll talk about a little bit later, brings its own sets of challenges and the impact that it has on behavior and learning. And, if people are high and they don't, there's a lot of bad things that happen with that as well. So that's the other thing. You're adding now other chemicals to it. Another reason why it's not safe is the flavoring. So it's not just that it's nicotine. What they do is they add certain flavors to the nicotine. I'll use this example just so people can understand, but like with shisha, right? They have apple, like tufah flavored shisha, right? And so people like it because, it tastes very nice. This is 10 times more than that. They have flavors like cotton candy, and they have flavors like, strawberry banana, and they have flavors like cinnamon. So they have all these flavors, and these flavors, are going to be more attractive to you than if it was just tobacco flavored, right? Because these are kids, so they want to go with something that smells and tastes sweet. But the other thing, that doesn't look like it's harmful. That doesn't look like it should cause a problem. That looks like candy, you know? And if you put them side by side with candy, you wouldn't think that one is going to be dangerous for you and one is not, okay? So the pods, they come in like this very fun packaging, and they're flavored to be attractive to adolescents, okay? And because of these flavors, it makes it very difficult for people to discern and know whether it's good for you or bad for you, okay? Flavor, and there's been literature on this, is shown to be one of the most important factors for an adolescent or for a teenager to decide to even smoke or do vaping, because they like the flavor. So that's one of the most, they're not thinking about the nicotine and even the marijuana or anything. They're just like, oh, this tastes good and it smells good. And that's going to be one of the most important factors that decides if they're going to use it, okay? The problem is that these flavors are not safe either, okay? Because when you're burning it, like it's one thing if they showed a study, if you are eating, it was the chemical cinnamaldehyde. It's the chemical that they use for cinnamon, okay? It's one thing to be eating cinnamon, which is safe, but a different thing to be burning the cinnamon and now inhaling it into your lungs. And when you burn that cinnamon and inhale it into your lungs, it has some of those same carcinogenic compounds, the things that cause cancer. So they're not meant to be burned and combusted, but that's what we're doing every time with these flavorings and with the additives and with the nicotine, okay? And then the last point I'll mention on this before I get to the next part is the advertising. So we talked about this a little bit before, but there's bright colors, and the appearance of it, like I said, makes it look like candy, and it attracts younger people. Who here has ever seen a commercial on TV for cigarettes? Anybody? Probably, like here in the U.S., they banned cigarette commercials maybe somewhere around about 50 years ago, okay? And it's because it was so attractive, they're trying to cut off the people from smoking and getting access to it. But they haven't done that with e-cigarettes, like Abuna was saying earlier, because I think one, it's early. People don't fully understand. There's been some changes recently, but still people don't know. And so you're going to see the same advertisements about e-cigarettes that you saw 50, 60 years ago with regular cigarettes, okay? And maybe 50, 60 years from now, we'll be looking back at this and saying, wow, I can't believe that they used to show advertisements for e-cigarettes. That's the same way that we look back at regular cigarettes. So, what we're seeing is history repeating itself. And what we saw before, now we're beginning to see it again. So what can e-cigarettes do to your body? And this is the other thing, just it says 90% of students see vaping ads on social media, okay? So even there may be things on TV, and maybe you say, well, my kid doesn't watch TV. There's other ways that they can see these advertisements. Especially on social media, it's very common for them to see it, and it's very easy for them to get access to it, okay? I was just looking online today. I can get e-cigarettes delivered to my house within 24 hours. I just click a button, I put my address in. There were 50 places within 10 miles of me that sell just Juul. I wasn't even looking at all the other brands. Just Juul, 50 places within 10 miles, and I can get all of them like that, okay? It's easy. Dispensaries, yeah. And it's not expensive either. A starter pack, I think they had some deals going on that you could get like a starter pack, and it was like $20 or $25. So they make a very good pitch, yeah. So it's easy to get. You can get it online. You can see it on social media. You can also get it at convenience stores or gas stations. And even if you don't have those things, you can get it from your friends, right? Because other people at school are using it. It's very easy to get to, okay? So what exactly can it do to your body? Let's say you decide to do the e-cigarettes and, you want to use it. I'll show a couple of things here. And I'll go through the different parts of the body that are affected by it. We'll start out with pulmonary. I like pulmonary. That's what I do for work every day. So I think that's the most important one, although we'll show some other ones. But the pulmonary one is pretty good. So there's a condition that's called E-Valley, which stands for e-cigarette vaping associated lung injury. The name is not important. What is important, though, this is the way that your body responds to chemicals when you inhale it, okay? And I guess the height of this was in the second half of 2019 and early 2020, where we saw a sharp rise in people going to the hospital, especially young people, adolescents. They were going to the hospital and being hospitalized for respiratory failure. I mean, they couldn't breathe, and they had to go, and some of them had to be on a breathing machine, and they couldn't life support. And some of them were so sick that they even died, okay? And what was happening is that people were seeing inflammation. You guys don't see a lot of these scans, but these are the type of scans that we look at every day. The parts that are black, this doesn't show it very well. The parts that are black are actually the normal parts. The parts that are white over here and over here, those are the parts that are not normal. And because they're not normal, they can't bring oxygen into the body, which is the main purpose of the lungs, right? You need to bring oxygen so you can live. But if you can't bring oxygen into your body, the whole body shuts down. And that's what's happening with them as a result of the e-cigarettes, okay? Now, when they went back and looked at, it got better after this, and part of the reason that this happened and there was a big epidemic for a few months was it had to do with the people that were combining the marijuana into their e-cigarettes, and some of the components of the marijuana mixed with the nicotine, and that's what caused this. So this doesn't happen as often now, but it's still important because, what's the next thing that they're going to decide to put into, the vaping device? Anybody, it's anybody's guess. You can add anything to it. But this is what happened, and so a lot of people died from this. Some of them were very young, okay? There are other side effects that are not related to any specific part of the body, but people have reported things like nausea or vomiting or diarrhea or fevers or losing weight, okay? And the fact of the matter, these are all the short-term effects that we know of right now. But what we don't know is what happens in the long term, okay? Remember from the ads that the cigarette companies ran in the 30s and the 40s, talking about how great the regular cigarettes were. But they didn't know that the same people that they were advertising to now in a generation would all be dying from lung cancer, okay? And the same way, we don't know what the long-term effects. E-cigarettes haven't been around that long. Okay, they came out in 2007, 2008, and then they really became popular in the mid 2015, 2016, up until the last 3-4 years. Okay, and so I always like this one. It says, we don't know what the effects of vaping are, but don't be a lab rat. You don't want to be the one that we go back and write medical articles on. You don't want to be the one that we're writing a journal article about you and saying, oh, this is a very interesting case. That's never a good thing. If you're ever seeing a doctor and then 10 other doctors come into the room, that's a bad thing. They said this is really interesting. You want to be the boring case. So don't be a lab rat for vaping, okay? Like I said, it's entirely possible that a generation from now will be looking back at the people that have been vaping for 20, 30, 40 years and seeing these same things and seeing that they're developing lung cancer or seeing that they're developing other lethal consequences. Mm-hmm.
So basically إيهاب عدى على الاي سيجرتس، الطريقة اللي بتشتغل بيها المكنة نفسها، في بطارية جوه وفيها زي سلك كده بيسخن السائل ده دايب فيه النيكوتين، معمول من 4 أو 5 مواد معروفة وجواهم النيكوتين. العبوة الواحدة في الفيب، الصباع الفيب، تساوي علبة سجاير كاملة. كمية النيكوتين اللي موجودة في الصباع الواحد ده قد 20 سيجارة. الأوحش من كده كان بيقول إن هم لما بيجوا بتطلب أونلاين الريفيل، عامل زي الإنك بتاع برينتر أو whatever، إزازة كبيرة وإنت اللي بتملى الكارتلج الصغيرة بتاعتك. المشكلة إنها بتجيلك فيها جرام نيكوتين، فالعيال ممكن تزود كمية النيكوتين أكتر بكتير من علبة، وده حصل قبل كده فعلا. فممكن يزودوا قوي الدوس، وده فيه خطورة اكتر من كده. جم قال لك طب ما ننوع بقى، نعمل ايه؟ طب نجيب ال THC الليكويد بتاع الحشيش ونحطه على الجول، فيبقى فيه نيكوتين وفيه حشيش جوه البتاعة دي، والعيال بتدخن الاتنين مع بعض، فيبقى عندك علبة سجاير مع توليفة كده. الحاجة التانية اللي كبيرة هي انهم بيحطوا مش بس كل طعم ممكن تفكروا فيه، من بونبوني والبان وبوب كورن كل الكومن درينكس اللي العيال بتحبها. العيال كمان عندها بالذات سنهم اصغر، الستادي اللي وراها لنا ايهاب ان تقريبا 66% منهم ما يعرفوش ان في ماده اسمها نيكوتين اللي هي ماده السجاير جوه العبوه دي. ما بتسالهم ردوا قالوا ده مجرد دخان بطعم. فهم فعلا في نسبه كبيره قوي منهم عندهم جهل لان في ماده مخدره جوه الحاجه دي that is addictive، ودي اكتر حاجه تخوف. والبيج بارت اوف ذا ماركتنج هي انهم بيشكلوها لهم بالطعم والشكل، حتى العبوه الخارجيه بتاعتها بيبقى شكلها حاجه عاديه. فانتوا ممكن يعني مش انتوا طبعا بعد الشر، في بيوت الناس ساعات بتبقى موجوده في وسط حاجه الاولاد والاهالي ما بتدراش لانها شكلها زي كاندي زي قلم زي اي حاجه تانية. الحاجه الاكبر الايفكت بتاع الرئه هو ان النيكوتين ده لما بيتسخن وبيتشم مع المواد التانية، صحيح مش نفس كميه المواد المسرطنه اللي كانت موجوده في السجاير، بس ستيل مواد مش المفروض ان احنا نستنشقها، whether كانت المواد المذيبه للنيكوتين بتكمل السائل او المواد اللي بتدي فليفر. ده كله بيعمل تكلس في الرئه. الرئه المفروض تتنفخ زي البالونه تملى هواء، والهواء ده بيدخل اكسجين الجسم. المواد دي بتلهب الرئه، فالرئه تتجمد ما تعرفش تتنفخ وتاخد الهواء، وبالتالي العيال بتتعب بسبب الحكايه دي. الرئه نفسها بتبطل تتنفخ للاخر او تشتغل. في ناس بيجي لها غثيان وترجيع واسهال وخسسان وكل الكلام ده. المشكله الاكبر ان احنا ما عندناش وقت ندرس بيه المشكله طويله المدى. يعني احنا بنبص على السجاير اللي كان بقى لها 300 سنه وعارفين انها مضره من 64، لكن احنا عيالنا هم فار التجارب للاسف يعني.
So the last part, I'm almost done, maybe another 5-10 minutes here. But so we talked about pulmonary, we talked about other parts of the body, and the last part I would say is neurologic, which actually probably is the most important thing, and the effect that it has on the brain. You know, it's ironic that when they first came up with e-cigarettes, what the reason that they were advertising it was for a way to help addiction, to help people who smoke cigarettes quit smoking cigarettes and go to something that's better or healthier, exactly, okay? But it's actually the opposite that's true. What you're finding is that there are people who don't smoke cigarettes, and then they end up using e-cigarettes, and that leads to them smoking cigarettes. So just give you some examples here. First of all, who exactly is using e-cigarettes? In high schoolers, this is from 2019 and 2020, you can see at the height of it in 2019, 28% of high school students were using e-cigarettes. And then in 2020, it got a little bit better, probably because of the pandemic, not the pandemic, sorry, the epidemic of people getting that E-Valley, the lung injury. You know, people were dying, people got scared, and there were a lot of new regulations that came. But still, 20%, that's 1 in 5. And if I get 5 high schoolers here right now, one of them smoked e-cigarettes in the last, I think this was in the last 30 days, I think what this survey was, okay? Middle school, you think, oh, well, you know, my kid's in middle school, I don't have to worry about it. In middle school, that's still 5% of middle schoolers in 2020. So 5% is not a small number, okay? Yeah.
It's on the rise. I see it.
Yeah, yeah.
I see it among our kids.
Yeah, yeah.
We have a lot of kids, and actually said it, that they don't. I asked them, "Do you buy it?" He said, "No, my friends give it to me." A lot of our kids, I'm telling you, middle schoolers. So we have to really educate. We have to really educate.
And like I said, even though it was invented as a way that was supposed to help people quit smoking, it's actually doing the opposite. So if you look, I'm sorry, this is too small for you to see, but if you see the one on the left says that for teenagers who use e-cigarettes, that they're more likely to begin using regular cigarettes, okay, within 6 months. And this one on the right also shows the same thing, although there's a lot of numbers on here, but the important part is up to 7 times more likely to use cigarettes after using e-cigarettes. So it was invented to help people quit cigarettes, but instead it's actually a gateway to help people start smoking cigarettes. Okay? And the e-cigarettes, that's what it's doing. And, you know, this can be a lifelong addiction. Like if you actually look at anybody who smokes cigarettes, 90% of people who smoke cigarettes started when they were in their teenage years. Most of the people that I talk to, when I ask how old were you when you started smoking, they say, you know, 16, 14, 12, 8. I think the youngest I heard was 7 or 8. Okay, and they started smoking cigarettes. So that very common. They just get it from their parents. Yeah. Yes, yes.
Egypt and Europe, it's like no exceptions. Very few that don't vape. Egypt and Europe, all the kids are walking, smoking vape.
Yep.
Became the norm.
And even yeah, no, absolutely. I think the burden of cigarette smoke is worse in other parts of the world. It's actually better in the U.S. than in other parts. But e-cigarettes are creating an entirely new generation of addicts, of people that are addicted to nicotine. And it's happening while people are young. And that's really unfortunate because when you're young, you're still developing, okay? Specifically, your brain is still developing. And we've shown before, scientifically and medically, that nicotine exposure is linked to cognitive deficits, meaning that they don't think well, their memory is not good, they can't make decisions well, okay? And the same with electronic cigarettes, that they've been connected with people being what they call impulsivity, meaning they make very quick decisions but bad decisions. They're very impulsive. And there was another study that showed that they can have hyperactive syndrome and have difficulty concentrating. So, you know, some of the people, you know, kids that are suffering from ADHD, so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So those have been shown to be linked to nicotine exposure, so cigarettes as well as e-cigarettes. Okay. Yeah. 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 And one other thing is that it's also linked with suicide attempts as well, depression and suicide attempts.
right? They manifest. So إيهاب كان بيقول إنه من ضمن الحاجات غير إن بقى في جيل دلوقتي عنده إدمان. ودي أكبر حاجة صحية مثبتة إن العيال اللي بتدخن مع إن الجول كان معمول أو الإي سيجرتس معمولة علشان تخلي الناس تبطل عادة السجاير بكل المواد المضرة اللي فيها. دلوقتي لما عدى شوية وقت اكتشفنا إن الناس دي هي اللي بتدخن الإي سيجرتس هم أكتر ناس عندهم استعداد إنهم يدخنوا سجاير عادية. فمع انها اتعملت على اساس انها حاجه صحيه اكتر، هي بالعكس قلبت انها بتشجع الناس انها تكمل التعرض للنيكوتين، وحته الادمان بقت متمسكه فيهم اكتر بكتير قوي. فموضوع الادكشن ده اكبر حاجه. من الحاجات الذهنيه والاثار الذهنيه ان التركيز قل في العيال. بقى في اثبات مباشر ما بين التعرض لنسبه النيكوتين واعراض مماثله لمرض الفطر الحركي ADHD. فبتخلي العيال مش قادرة تركز، بتخلي عندهم قدرة أقل على اتخاذ القرارات. what else did we say؟ أو قرارات غير متسرعة. والنسبة أعلى في العيال اللي بتدخن لأفكار الانتحار. يعني دي حاجات خلاص بقت مثبتة وفي causation في ارتباط مباشر ما بين الاثنين.
And then the last thing I'll say about sort of the neurologic impact is that in addition to addiction, it can serve as a gateway drug to other things. So I mentioned just as a gateway to regular cigarettes, which is bad. But there are other things even worse than that it can be a gateway to. So one of the big things, for instance, is we talked about the marijuana earlier, and the impact that marijuana can have on the developing brain is as bad or if not worse than what nicotine does. Okay, that it changes the brain structure, has the same issues with attention deficits and hyperactivity, learning difficulties, memory problems. Even some people will suffer from paranoia, anxiety, hallucinations, increased suicide attempts, depression, and anxiety. So the number of things that this can lead to, it's real, and the kids are suffering from it. Okay, and I think it's hard for us to understand what can we do as parents and as servants. How do we address this, and what is it for us to do? And this is where I'll end. I think there's a few things I just want to bring to light and focus on. One is be educated. Know what e-cigarettes are and what they can do. This talk tonight is just one way for you to become educated, but there's lots of resources online if you look of how we can get educated on e-cigarettes. And the more that you know about it, the better prepared that you can be to talk about it with your kids, which is the second thing. Talk about it with your kids, right? Because they need to hear from you, and you need to make it clear that it's not okay to smoke e-cigarettes. And you can use all the reasons that we talked about tonight as why. And you can educate them as well. Like I showed earlier, some of them don't know that there is nicotine in there. So they may say to you, well, what's wrong with it? And then you can tell them these are all the things that are wrong with it. There is nicotine. There are drugs. There are ways that it's affecting and harming your brain, because they may not know that. And it's not just the flavoring, that it tastes good and it makes it look good. Why is it so bad? So you can educate your kids in a way that they may not know. The other thing is, when you talk to them, try and understand it from their perspective. Okay? If you can tell them, I understand why you want to vape, and I can see all the reasons why it makes sense. I understand that it tastes good. I understand that it feels good. I understand that there's peer pressure of all your friends that are telling you, yeah, we should do it, and there's nothing wrong with it, and it's not a big deal. I get that. I was at your age once, and I know why you want to do it. I think when you give them that perspective, they're more likely to listen to the next thing that you want to tell them is why it's bad for them. But if you just come in straight and say, in this house, we don't do e-cigarettes, we don't smoke, we don't do, I don't want to see you smoke, you're not going to see them smoke, because what's going to happen is they're going to do it behind your back. So understanding it from their perspective and knowing, telling them and giving them an open space to talk, they'll be more likely to listen to you when you go on to explain to them all the reasons of why not to vape. Okay, so you want to create a safe space for them. The next one is don't smoke. It seems, shouldn't have to say, but if you smoke, they will smoke. Okay, most of the people, like I said, that I see in my clinic, they started smoking when they were young, and a lot of them, they smoked because they saw their parents smoke, and they took the cigarettes from their parents, and their parents probably started smoking when they were young too. So that, it just propagates every generation. So if you smoke, it's likely that they're going to smoke as well, and it's going to be very hard to convince them not to smoke if that's something that you're doing as well. And then the last one, yeah. I mean, and shisha. Shisha's got nicotine in it too, and there's been studies on it, and it has a high addictive potential too. But we won't get into. But yes, that's absolutely true. Another thing I'll mention is that you're not alone. So there are people that are fighting this. In July, for instance, the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, they actually banned Juul from giving any products in the U.S. Okay. Now, after that, then Juul appealed it in the courts, and then they halted the order, and so I think it's still available and you can get it now. But people are trying to fight for it. After that, the epidemic at the end of 2019, when we started to see teenagers die from e-cigarettes, a lot of rules came. So they raised the age from 18 to 21, which is not a big deal, but they tried to raise the age. They said no vaping indoors. They put higher taxes on it. They made it more expensive. So they're doing all these things to try and stop it. And that's really helpful to see that there are people that are trying to fight this, and we want to be able to do the same thing. And then the last thing is the last point. I know the kids are coming in right now. But the last thing is to fill ourselves with God. When people turn to substances, this is often because there's a feeling of emptiness inside, right? And that there's a void inside of each of us that's designed to be filled with God. We were designed by God in his image, with a yearning to have him fill our hearts. And so when we turn from him, we're oftentimes left in search for other things to try and fill us. So I think of the Samaritan woman. So the Samaritan woman, she was thirsty, but she couldn't find anything to fill her, okay, and quench her thirst. It wasn't until Christ came to her and said, I have the living water, and when I give you that living water, it shall be a well of water springing up into everlasting life. Because that's the way God works. He doesn't just heal the sick, he turns them into doctors. And that's what God wants to do for us. So may God give us the wisdom and the strength and the courage to help protect and educate our children and raise them for his glory. Glory be to God forever.
Amen. We told them you're not alone, but they're not stopping. What kind of help, professional help, our kids need if we realize that they are hooked on it, addicted to it, especially if there is THC involved?
If they're addicted, it's actually a true addiction. I mean, addiction is not an easy thing to deal with. We see a lot of patients that come in. The hospital that I work at is mostly treating people who are homeless, who are addicted to drugs, living on the streets of Boston. And we see a lot of patients that get admitted over and over. They come into the hospital with an overdose, and then you get them better. They go back out on the street, and they come back maybe a couple days later with the same thing. And it's this vicious cycle of them going over and over again. So it's not easy to overcome. I think there are a lot of resources out there for people to get access to, but the problem is the person themselves has to want to participate in that. Yeah.
Can we get some resources?
So there are some online resources for adults and kids to quit, and I can share them because I'm assuming that we all have struggles. But besides that, I don't know. But there are some good online resources and some apps. Actually, there are some apps that help you quit, I think.
So the other thing I want to say to some of our kids, and you have to really understand that, because if we do not know the reason, عمرنا ما هنعرف نحل الissue. If our kids عندهم low self-esteem for whatever reason, and we have, or they want to fit into a group, هم حاسين ان هم alone. They look different. Sometimes they sound different if they just came. Their parents are different than everyone else, and they want to fit in. That's a way to fit in. And the way to recorrect that, they need to talk to someone. They need to, more of like a therapy, not just like a one-time talk, more of a therapy. They need to accept who they are for who they are. Otherwise, they're going to always look for ways يدوروا على حاجات يفت in بيها. يدخلوا المنظومة. عارفين a lot of our kids get into working out مثلا. They want to fit in. Some of them want to get into football, which there are good things or good ways to fit in. But some of them, because of their groups at school, it's smoking. Sometimes it's drugs. Sometimes it's girls and hooking up. And we have to realize that. Sometimes it's like, how many girls did I go out with? That's the thinking. So it's how they fit in. And the only way you can deal with this is by therapy. Any other questions?